So good morning, dear friends. January is what it is. Rainy, foggy and cold. And yet, quite a few of you have made it to the hall right on time. And I really appreciate it. A warm welcome to all of you and to our resource person, Professor Shawal.
Thank you.
Today is the fourth day of our course. Our journey so far has been good, rather remarkable, and it promises to be even better in the days to come. Today's lecture topic, as you already know, you have the brochure and also the program. Very soon it's going to be displayed here. Is institutionalizing the post-Cold War Asia. This lecture will be for an hour, followed by a tea break, a short tea break, let me emphasize. Again followed by a tutorial, and the question that would be discussed is, are institutions, especially regional ones, still relevant? But before the lecture starts, I have to make a few announcements. You would have received an email with some readings, yes? So please go through it carefully, very, very carefully. Today you'll also get a topic on which you're supposed to write a short essay, an essay of about 1,000 words. It's going to be displayed soon. So you have to go through the SEO charter carefully, and it is only then you have to attempt to write that essay. So today is a Thursday. So you have a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. On Tuesday, you have to submit your assignments so that professor could evaluate it well on time before he leaves for Paris. So it's my request to all of you that please do the work right on time, because no late submissions will be accepted. That's what Professor Shawal has made it very, very clear. So we have to collect the hard copies of your essay, which is not a very big essay, a short essay of 1,000 words. But if you apply your mind, it must read, it must come across as original thoughts coming from thinking scholars. And yes, I reiterate again and again, it's very, very important to be regular. Not only does it impact the learning outcome, but most importantly, also the certificate that you are going to receive. So warm welcome to all of you again. And yes, over to you, Professor Shawal.
Thank you very much. Namaste to all. I wish you a good Thursday and soon a good weekend to come. Is this on? Can you? Yes? So I think it is appropriate at this time in the 2 weeks that we spent together that I remind you again that the general format of this course, as I've conceived it, is to start from a broad perspective, then focus and narrow down on the more technical, so to speak, or institutional aspects of the Shanghai cooperation, and broaden again the perspective towards the last chapters next week. I indeed started with history and historical backgrounds and some dates, and the word history, I suppose, I have renamed context yesterday or the day before, and that's what it is. I'm not a historian, but history feeds into the context, and the context is what triggers or motivates changes as of the magnitude that these changes have been taking place on this continent. I also mentioned classic geopolitical concepts and is this working or not? Yes? Yes. With, again, the classic terms of center and periphery, but however classic, these are fuel for thought to understand or make sense of the phenomena in the making. And I use the word comprehensive many, many times, and the word comprehensive is actually present on many occasions in the Charter, so it corresponds also to a head of state diplomatic phrasing of their ambitions. I then went on Monday with the imperfect term of mistakes to underline the relevance and difficulty of making decisions that have historical impact upon nations. And I stick to my suggestion, which could be better phrased, I'm sure, that a number of such decisions taken since 1991, 1996, 2001 are of such a nature as to avoid mistakes, or at least avoid steps which would have slowed down, at least slowed down, if not make much more difficult, the coexistence, the new continental diplomacy in this region. I then suggested to start from the peripheries, start from the observers, start from the non-heavyweights or the non-key actors, as they're sometimes called, on purpose. On purpose, because it is this capacity to act in two directions, to formalize and bring together the original 5 or 6, which at the same time as ambitioning very early on in the Charter, providing for the categories of observers and dialogue partners, activating those categories later, but from the start ambitioning to affiliate, that's my term, or associate if you wish, as many countries in the vast region as possible. That's what I have been doing so far, and we come now to a 4th chapter entitled
Just a minute.
Yes. Entitled Institutionalizing the Post-Cold War Asia. And the word institution, or the verb to institutionalize, or the gerundive institutionalizing, is something I need to explain in my introduction. What basically I have in mind to do today, and possibly also tomorrow, and even on Monday, is to insist or underline the extent to which what is called by me the Shanghai Cooperation or the Shanghai Process has 3 characteristics. It is first of all a structuring process in the full sense of the term, which not rigidifies but structures, makes concrete, if you wish, in a sense, or provides mechanisms. I will use the term mechanism many times today. Provides mechanisms for common reflection, common decisions, and common actions among the member states. Not common policies, because the term common policies has a specific meaning in the European context, in the integrative or integration context, but common actions is what I meant. Secondly, the main characteristic is that of innovation, being innovative, or innovativeness, if we were to risk a neologism. That is to say, a constant capacity to go beyond the existing state of the agreements. For example, going immediately from diplomatic agreements to economic measures, and then very, very quickly on, 2 years later, starting the military form of cooperation. And the third main characteristic, which is close to the second, is the potential dimension, the fact that even if steps that have not yet been taken, such steps as perhaps more integrative, or some steps as perhaps making more countries members and so on, even if they are not formally taken, they are somewhere in the air, they are somewhere in the potential evolutions to come soon. That is by way of introduction to this session today. And why the focus on the institutional dimension is helpful to us, because it solves or it avoids one query, which is a throbbing headache for some of my colleagues, to agree on the legal nature of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And lawyers, in the book that we did, wrote a number of chapters saying the legal nature of the organization isn't clear. This was said by a French colleague writing from the French point of view, and from the point of view of a very good colleague from Uzbekistan who actually works in Astana in Kazakhstan. But the legal nature is not our concern today here. Our concern is to understand to what extent there is an institutional dimension in the construction of the Shanghai cooperation, and assuming there is an institutional dimension, what does it mean and what is it? I propose four statements which are on the board, which give the impression of being chronological, but they are not in my mind, starting with the time perspective on the perennialization of the Shanghai spirit in the early years of 2001-2002, moving to a space perspective in paragraph 2 in the years 2004 and 2005, what I call the deepening without integrating, And the third paragraph, still from a space perspective, in the same years, enlarging without committing. And the terms deepening and enlarging, of course, come from the European Union vocabulary, as you know, but I don't mean them as, again, Eurocentric, but as comparative. And the last paragraph will be looking at the following years, the capacity to innovate without offsetting. And you notice the word without used 3 times in my titles, and that is not suggesting something is missing, but it is suggesting that something is very gradual, that it's not a forceful form of imposition upon states which have their history, their traditions, and their sometimes recent difficult past. So that's the program for today's session, and I begin immediately with paragraph 1. I think why I call paragraph 1 a time perspective is because things have happened or occurred very quickly. There is a definite concern and activism consisting of not wanting to let the Shanghai Group spirit or the Shanghai Group realization subside. The urgency is felt to do something quickly in 2001 or thereabout to prolong immediately the Shanghai Group achievements. That's what my colleague Jingguo Jia calls it in the article I gave you and to which I'll come back. Not to let the achievements or spirit of the Shanghai Five, 96, 2001, subside. Why? Because the ambitions of the Shanghai Five were realized. There was a sort of conclusive success of the 5 years of its existence. And after those 5 years, there was no need to go on in the same format. There was a need and a possibility to go on with a different format, more comprehensive, not integrative, but more comprehensive. This is what we need to remind ourselves of to understand the transition from the Shanghai Five to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There is a feeling in the spring of 2001 that there has been reached a sort of completion of the ambitions of the 1990s and the needs of the 1990s, which is to stabilize the area in the post-Cold War period, in the post-Soviet period. To stabilize it because it has been, before then, not unstable, but very tense a region for the countries concerned. And so there is indeed this idea of a completion taking place in 2001, in the sense that all countries concerned are involved in the new format created, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. All meaning all 5 Central Asian countries, even if Turkmenistan is, due to its policy of perpetual neutrality, which in technical historical terms is called isolationism to some extent, is not part of it. So Turkmenistan is immediately at that time in the potential cloud. It's there somewhere, later to receive the status of guest attendant, which is an exception to the format of the organization. So to complete the Shanghai spirit by creating a new organization, with the symbol I have used as an example before you many times of Uzbekistan being definitely part of the region, but not sharing a border with China, whereas the sharing of a border with China was until then the criterion for being part of the Shanghai Group and the border negotiation initiated in the 1980s. And so the presence of Uzbekistan has this extremely important meaning beyond its cartography of expanding the rationale, expanding the goals pursued by the new format, the Shanghai Organization. And that new format is to associate countries that are neighbors, contiguous, one through the other maybe, but contiguous, and hence the key word of neighborhood, good neighborhood, renewed neighborhood, good neighborhood, friendly neighborhood, which is the coin phrase of the Shanghai construction, as I've said to you before. And beyond this would-be cartographic significance of Uzbekistan, the other significance is that until then, at least, until then, 2005, Uzbekistan is the one country of the region whose foreign policy has been more openly engaging or engaged to the west of the continent and to the west, as it is called in diplomacy. Uzbekistan is the one country which, after 1991, adopted a foreign policy consisting of opening up to post-Soviet, beyond Russian or strictly Central Asian directions. So to have that country, which until, I repeat, 2005, was really, I'm just thinking of the right word, yes, engaging the West into the new formation, is not a cartographic but a diplomatic step that we should, and a historical step we should attach much value to. That's 2001, and I refer you to this text by Qian Guojia, The Success of the Shanghai Five, which you have read because you have done all the homework and reading, and it's a very good text. Because it is short, it is only 5 to 6 pages, it is clearly structured, and it goes through the various steps year after year, summit after summit of the Shanghai Five, giving the background, the context, the decisions, the achievements, and the concrete measures that were adopted. It is, thank you so much. I have the best colleague ever sitting next to me, whom I don't know how to thank, but I'll think of a way. Where was I? Yes, this text has 3 main parts. The evolution of the Shanghai Five, year after year after year. It's very clearly written. A second part on the achievements of the Shanghai Five, so after the context, the real results. And it clearly makes us aware that the border issue, while central at first, remains determining, but is immediately not superseded, but accompanied or immersed in other considerations, such as economic mechanisms. And then it calls section 3 the secret of the success. And the secret of success is very interesting, written by this colleague. First of all, the capacity to establish shared interests. Now, shared interests is something which is a very easy expression, but shared interests among whom? Among 2 countries, China and Russia, which have been in a state of extreme tension for decades, and 5 countries or 4 countries of Central Asia, which have disappeared in my terminology for so many years, and which have reappeared as equal partners, certainly by virtue of a charter. So shared interest or sharing interests, or defining common interests, or shared or not similar, not identical, but shared interests, is not easy to do. Secondly, shared values, which he calls shared norms, but reading the text, I think it should be called shared values, such as the sovereignty, the territorial integrity, the non-aggression, which then becomes in the Charter, the non-intervention in domestic affairs and so on. And the third secret is pragmatism. Pragmatism, I think, is a term that makes sense in this context. It is perhaps unduly modest, because there is more than sheer pragmatism. There is a degree of institutionalism, but still. So this text is directly to be related to paragraph 1 of my presentation. Still in paragraph 1, what happens in June 2002 happens very quickly, only 1 year later. I think 1 year later is a short time again to adopt a charter, which is here. A charter which is very, again, an interesting text, which you have looked at, or which you will look at. And it's, again, very short, very succinct, but it contains all the main ingredients, especially the common courses of action against the 3 perceived dangers or evils or causes of potential destabilization, which are called in section 1 terrorism, separatism, extremism, sometimes called in other writings, not official writings, but by colleagues, international terrorism, territorial separatism, and political extremism. I think the adjectives add something, but they're not in the Charter. This Charter is remarkable because it is, in my vocabulary, open-ended. It does mention, if you want to find it, that it is open-ended in time. It is irreversible in its spirit. It is comprehensive in its multidisciplinary or intersectoral dimensions, and it contains a number of, again, potential potential directions that are open. And when I say it is short, I mean that it is really 3 sections followed by almost a dozen sections which are technical or which detail the institutions or the structure. It is the sections devoted to the organizational chart of the organization from Article 4 to Article 11. And then only articles, they are short ones, 12 to 20, give more specifications on the financing, on the membership, on the relation to other organizations and the legal capacity, decision-making procedure by consensus, and so on. So it is a short text, a very complete text, which today, of course, seems to be almost a routine or de facto document that should have existed, but which at the time was not obvious in its, I repeat, very rapid drafting and adopting in St. Petersburg on the 8th of June 2002. So within 2 years, and I conclude paragraph 1 now, within 2 years we have the invention, so to speak, the invention of a very formal construction which makes so much sense both at the scale of the participants, that is inventing something which I don't know whether I should call it the new Central Asia only, or the new Central Asia with China and Russia, but I'm sure that to be called Central Asian for Chinese and Russians would be disputable, or whether I should call it the new Asia, which my colleague disputes, because it is too wide. In between, let's call it the new Neo-Central Asia, or the new, let's call it what it should be called. It should be called, at that time then, the new Sino post-Soviet Asia. And the expression post-Sino I have used until recently. Now I use, of course, the expression I call it the Sino-Central Asian, North Asian, South Asian dimension. So the fact that the name should change reflects the rapidity of the dynamism of the construction. Paragraph 2 I've called deepening without integrating, and deepening without integrating in relation to space, I think, more than to time. The dates matter less to me now. The dates matter in paragraph 1 to underline the rapidity of the evolution. The dates matter less in paragraph 2 because what is the emphasis is on the substance or the construction of what, and the institutional construction of what happens. Not only is that period the moment when a number of economic measures or economic programs are adopted. In 2003, for example, the so-called 101 economic measures, which is a very ambitious economic program, as every program never fully realized, but still existing among countries which, I repeat, until not so long before, were not only not able to cooperate together, but were in a state of either disappearance for some or in a state of tension for others. And that 2003 economic program of 101 measures was followed, as you know, about 10 years later in 2015 at the UFA summit by an economic program 2015-2025, which is also a very ambitious program among the members. But I think we could underline 3 or 4 or 5 steps, which I call institutional, that were taken in that period. The first, which is on the board, I suppose, is the creation of the RATS structure, the Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is one of the only 2 permanent structures. The other is the Secretariat. 2 others are on paper, not fully public, but semi-public ones. I'll come back to them just in a few minutes. They are the Business Council and the Interbanking Association. But the RATS is particularly interesting for a number of reasons. I have touched upon the RATS by anticipation, I think, already, because, due to your questions in the previous days. The Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure is interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, it was created in 2003, therefore, again, very early. And it consists very early of the decision to bring together the secret services, or at least part of the information of the participating states. And as I said, to share secret service or to share intelligence information is not an easy thing to do for sovereign states. It never was and never is. is anywhere in the world. It is also created and established in Kyrgyzstan first, in 2003. I remember once I told my students it was established in 2003, and they raised their hands saying, "No, you're wrong. It was established in 2004 in Tashkent." I said, it was moved a year later, unless I'm totally wrong, which may well be. And I think the move from Bishkek to Tashkent can be briefly commented upon using my intuitions, of course not the official explanation. But before I do that, let me just underline that if you go and study a little bit the RATS documents and the context and the way in which it was created, it is very interesting due to its ambitious proposed form of work to come up with a commonly agreed list of organizations considered as terrorists by all members, and therefore the object of common police or whichever public order reaction on the part of the states. Particularly difficult because some of these organizations are established in one of the states and acting in another state of the states. They sometimes conduct actions in one country and then cross the border to seek shelter in the other country. So this makes a state-to-state cooperation particularly difficult. The ambition is extremely high, and the degree of secrecy. How do you share secrecy while keeping sovereign intelligence to yourself? It's not an easy thing to do, and of course no one knows, neither you nor I know exactly what happens within the walls and the offices of the RATS, because when years later they let the idea come across that researchers were welcome to study the security issues of this organization. I said, raised my hand saying, I'll be happy to visit. But they said, no, we have open access for citizens of the member states. But so I wasn't. Similarly, the fact that such an organization, such a structure rests on a budget, which is commonly agreed and commonly financed by the member states, means very quickly, again 2003, 2004, that very quickly the concrete means of cooperating in the organization are given, are established, are agreed, and I launched. Now, the location changed from Bishkek to Tashkent, which I interpret, maybe wrongly, as suggesting that the location moves the organization to the capital city nearer in distance to the space considered Afghanistan, considered relevant for the possible nurturing of radical activities. And in fact, the border between Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, which is a short one, I think only 35 kilometers, used to be, I think it seems to have changed now, but it used to be a very heavily guarded border, considered as the one point in space where it was most likely that radical groups might be able to cross and so on and so forth. So the RATS, I think, however, a little studied because it is secret by definition, it is a secret services cooperation, is extremely, not just symbolically, it's extremely realistically, I think, the concrete demonstration of the capacity to go beyond words, beyond diplomacy, and do something very, very concrete among member states. The second, not institution, but the second institutional dimension that I wish to mention, I have already anticipated yesterday, is the SEO Afghanistan Contact Group formed in 2005. It's not an institution, but it is something specific. There is no other contact group created between the SEO and one country. And the year is relevant. The year is 2005, which is the same year as the year when the Astana summit of the SEO made it clear that the ambition was to resist or fence off, whatever the term is, non-regional influence in the region. Non-regional influence in the region, meaning any superpower in the world, the USA, others, with a claim to be a sort of world actor everywhere. And at the time when, in the same declaration, the SEO demanded some sort of calendar, some sort of chronology for the closing down of Western military bases in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and also for a sort of calendar for the withdrawal of troops from combat troops from Afghanistan. So there was a homogeneous stance expressed through the 2005 SCO declaration, that they gradually felt the non-Asian presence, whether military or not, was the right term, was coming to the end of its logic. And 4 or 5 years after 2001, I think this made sense to suggest that the stabilization forces, after so many years, should have done their job, whereas in fact they stayed longer. The third institution, so to speak, and the fourth are the business councils and the business council and the interbanking association of the SCO. They are technically outside the state level chart, but they are in fact related to the chart. If you go to the SCO chart, you'll find it on the Wikipedia site. They are presented as private actors by contrast to public actors, which are the states. But in fact, the Business Council and the Interbanking Association associate national business communities and central banks of the countries concerned. So to that extent, are they really private or are they partly public? What this means, I think, to us is that there is a degree of introduction within the SCO economic, financial, budgetary, or business cross-investment mechanisms, what we call in French the logic of the market, letting the market forces freer to operate, and the aim being, of course, to foster and promote foreign direct investments among member states. The SCO University launched in the I think 2006 or 7, if I'm not mistaken, which is sometimes presented as a purely symbolic, not really a substantially important step, when I think it is not. It is more than symbolic. Student mobility, in fact, has always existed. At the time of the Middle Ages in Europe, people speaking Latin traveled from country to country to study or teach and research. The same was done in Arabic language from the Middle East to Central Asia at that time. And our partner university, Al-04 University in Kazakhstan, bears the name of a famous scholar who indeed traveled from Persia to Central Asia using Arabic. So I think the Erasmus scheme in Europe also is one that was created to foster through students, through education, a number of discoveries and agreements on values and evolutions of societies. So the same ambition exists within the SCO, which the SCO University, which consists, and I'm sure it's changed now, but not all member states participated originally in the SCO University, but some of them did, with the idea that if they did, they should learn the two languages of the SCO, the official languages, which are Chinese and Russian. So the Chinese learned Russian and the students from Central Asia learned Chinese, but also associating to the university countries not members of the organization, notably Afghanistan, which then paves the way in the 1910s for the possibility of Afghan students having to leave the country for whatever reason or choosing to study elsewhere than in Kabul or in Afghanistan, to be financed, to come on scholarships. And in great numbers, in Kazakhstan only, several hundreds of students from Afghanistan study, thereby demonstrating that there is something happening concretely at the human level, not just in high politics. The third paragraph I called Enlarging Without Committing, again in a space, and I will come here to the issue of observers and dialogue partners which have been affiliated to the organization. I mentioned this yesterday for the observers, but I will try to do it in this chapter, not from the point of view of the countries concerned, but from the point of view of the SCO itself. So from the point of view of the SCO, why include observers and why include dialogue partners in the way I'm going to present now. So if I'm clear, I'll try, and if I fail, please tell me, but I'll try not to adopt the point of view of yesterday, which is why would Iran, Pakistan, India, and wish to apply to be observers to the organization, but why would the organization enlarge or decide to enlarge to 4 observers and later to 2 dialogue partners. I think there is a way to present this issue very quickly in the following manner. In 2004, Mongolia was, from the point of view of the SCO, the object of attention due to the domestic political evolution within Mongolia, with tensions inside Mongolia between conservatives and neoliberals and so on. And so there was a way to so to speak, enhance again the proximity between Mongolia and China and Russia, perhaps a way also to challenge the third neighbor policy of Mongolia, and debatingly, I think perhaps testing the capacity of the two countries, China and Russia, to agree on a country easier than others, perhaps, to become the substance of this enlargement I'm referring to. To then want to affiliate as observers Iran, India, and Pakistan was clearly, I think, to provide Iran a possibility to so to speak, open a new diplomatic area after years of isolation. And when we come to India and Pakistan, this was a way for the two countries, China and Russia, with their Central Asian partners, to balance out the relative influence. One, China was being in favor of Pakistan being affiliated, and in balance, Russia being in favor of India being affiliated. But beyond those issues, there is a way in which this first enlargement, it's not technically speaking an enlargement because it's not to new members, but it's to new observers, is a way to secure good neighborhood, or to give more substance to good neighborhood beyond the Sino-post-Soviet dimension. Implicitly, the idea is that observers are destined one day possibly to become full members, and therefore the observer status becomes a sort of transition or a step from being outside to being fully inside, whereas this sort of, I'm looking for the right word, this transition status, which observer status is, was not really in their minds when this drafted the charter in 2002. And so much so that this sort of implicit possibility that observers are destined to become full members, that 5 years later, in 2010, the SCO declared a freeze on enlargement, declaring out front that we are not going to admit new members. We are going to remain at 6, which is sort of a contradiction with the fact of saying we are going to have observers in 2005 for, and they are somehow likely one day to become members. So something happened, either by way of caution, saying if we enlarge too quickly, we're going to be weaker inside. That's the European syndrome of being too numerous to be governable. So there was a freeze in 2010. And then a defreeze in 2012 and 2014, a defreeze not only in the spirit of saying we are open to new admissions of members, but we are going to specify the criteria for applications and candidacies of countries to become members of the SCO. Why is that? Because for many years after 2005, Iran received the idea or the response to its application as a full member, which was the following one. We are not against you, Iran, becoming a full member of the organization, but we don't have a procedure. We don't know how to proceed with your application if you do. And in 2012 and 14 in particular, the criteria and the procedure were specified. In between 2012, Afghanistan was made an observer out of the blue or out of its contact group status, as I have said to you before. So in that period, 2004, 5, 10, 12, 14, so much happens by way of what to call it, the preparation to enlargement, the preparation to growing formally in size and potential and might and world status by going beyond the 6 members of 2001. Something else happened, by which I will conclude paragraph 3. In 2007, which has gone almost completely unnoticed in the West, and I don't know how much noticed in India or in Asia, that is the fusion of the secretariats of the SCO and the CSTO. CSTO is the Collective Security Treaty Organization. I'll say more about this tomorrow in chapter 5. And so those who noticed that at the time, not many, suggested that this could be a first step towards one day possibly the merger of the 2 organizations, not just the secretariat, but the 2 organizations. And of course, imagining a fusion between the SCO and the CSTO, beyond the issue of membership, would provide the New Asia with a complete capacity to have both a political, economic, security organization, the SCO, plus a properly military organization, such as the CSTO, solving the conundrum of having one the SCO with everyone and having one the CSTO without China. So China is fully part and an activist member of the security economic dimension, but not a member of the military organization. That question was one very vivid one in the late 2000s. In the 2010s, the question changed, of course, and in the present time, it is a completely different question because in the meantime, 4 more countries have become members, and now to imagine an organization which would be both a security, economic, cultural, military, all-comprehensive organization with all present 10 member states is actually more difficult, at least in the short term. Now the 4th paragraph, 2009 and 2012, which I call innovating without offsetting, is the one that I will present to you with a reading guide. Where's the original page with the notes on it? The page from which you produced this. Thank you very much. This is the paragraph where I will mention the dialogue partners and the new affiliates trying to go beyond the list. The list is very tedious, and you probably have it very easily on the internet. But clearly, this period from 2009 is one most relevant to understand the dynamism or the potential dynamism of the Shanghai Organization. The reading guide that I will try to suggest before I forget it is fourfold. To try to characterize the affiliation of very numerous dialogue partners as a systematic extension, first. Second, to read between the lines and find some food for thought as to the Sino-Russian balance of preferences as to the new affiliates. Third, make clear what I called yesterday or the day before, the maritimization of the Shanghai dynamic by affiliating countries located on the shores of the key seas of the continent. And fourth, to some extent, the Asianization as para-Westernization of the situation. So the first 2 dialogue partners in 2009, as you know, are Belarus and Sri Lanka. And I think it's interesting to suggest beyond one point, a second point of comment about that. The fact that Belarus obviously was a preference or a suggestion by Russia is obvious to everyone due to a number of reasons. The fact that Sri Lanka was a preference or a suggestion of China is perhaps less clear. And the reasons that I've been able to uncover in my research are the following ones. For Belarus, clearly, for Belarus, the country clearly represents an interface between the post-Soviet Russia and the post-Cold War Europe and or NATO territory. And so Belarus is a key of the countries I called 2 days ago the arc of countries from the Baltic states to the Middle East. which are destined in the post-Cold War to go either west or east. Belarus went east, irrespective of the linguistic proximities and even the name of the, as you know, Belarus means White Russia and so on. The fact that there is a cultural proximity, which is the Orthodox religion between Russia and Belarus, is probably relevant as well, but not the key factor as far as I'm concerned. Now, why would China favor or privilege or want Sri Lanka to be in? What my research has produced is that the Chinese found the Sri Lankan advanced in their capacity through their police and security services to fight or to monitor radicalism or extremism or terrorism, whatever is the term used. And so that's one explanation given. The other explanation, I think, more realistically speaking, the egg and chicken, the SCU and the New Silk Road, is that Sri Lanka is ideally located on the maritime transport routes, and therefore, as the present years have showed us, a privileged, courted space situated along the lines of the maritime Silk Roads. Later on, now we come to the list of dialogue partners. Sorry? It's shared there. So what I have suggested and what I always suggest where's the list of dialogue partners? Sri Lanka. It should be, where is Belarus? Belarus has gone because it's now...
No, it's in the last. Don't look at that.
Yes, former dialogue. Oh, this is even better than I would have dreamed. You are really amazing. Belarus and Sri Lanka are first. They are ordered in years of affiliation, and within the years of affiliation by alphabetical order. So Sri Lanka and Belarus, then Turkey in 2012, the only one of 2012. And the meaning of that I've explained to you many, many times, at least the meaning that I see in Turkish affiliation is absolutely huge. Whether you privilege the fact that it is a NATO member, as I've underlined many, many times, or whether you underline the fact that it is both in Asia, both in Europe, and certainly a key to the Mediterranean, or the recipient end of the Baku-Tbilisi Ceyhan pipelines and so on and so forth. Turkey is absolutely a key territory, and it is in that sense an affiliation which, from the point of view of the Shanghai Organization, definitely gives substance to its extension to the West of the continent, the West in the cartographic sense of the continent. Yesterday I said that from the point of view of Turkey, it is an opening to its foreign policy after trying for decades the European dimension or the Middle Eastern dimension or the Arab dimension and failing there. And so having that as a third option, looking east and looking to the new Asia. Then in 2015 we have Cambodia, Azerbaijan, Nepal and Armenia. And in my commentary, I usually suggest that Armenia and Azerbaijan make sense in the sense of being post-Soviets and in the Caucasus. Nepal is a bit of a surprise at the time in terms of time. It's early for a country which until then has not been really talked about for the Shanghai Cooperation to become an affiliate, but Nepal is symbolically or cartographically or realistically situated in between China and India, and therefore it is a symbol of the extension south of the organization. Cambodia, as I mentioned before, is a surprise both in time and in space because it is not contiguous. But the recent moves, that's in the future. Where is the Vietnam and Myanmar are now mentioned as a potential future. Myanmar has become a dialogue partner. Vietnam, where's Vietnam? Vietnam is in the potential members. Asma. Okay, I saw Vietnam somewhere else, so it is talked about. I mean, it is sort of, as we say in French, in the air. And so Cambodia is not contiguous and therefore is a surprise. In terms of geopolitical symbols, it is a non-maritime, it's a landlocked non-maritime country of Southeast Asia. But the contiguity can only go through Vietnam or through Myanmar. And so at the time, my analysis was that Cambodia becoming an affiliate was a sort of preparation for, as soon as possible, a country situated between Cambodia and China to become an affiliate, establishing ex post the contiguous category. And then we have in 2001 Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, countries which had been mentioned in the past as potential affiliates. At that time, before they actually became one, other countries are also mentioned, notably Iraq and Syria and Jordan even. But the countries that became affiliates were Egypt and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Now, why Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia? In my analysis, essentially because they bring to the Shanghai dynamic the maritime dimensions of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea and the Gulf, a tremendous geopolitical gain for the organization. And then recently in 2022, 2023, Kuwait, Maldives, Myanmar, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, prolonging the same logics I've presented to you before, but no longer as potential logics, as actually actuated logics. So this is the list of dialogue partners. Altogether, we have, as I've said to you many times, 26 countries which are either members or observers or dialogue partners. My term is affiliates. I find it very convenient, that word, to be affiliated. And 26 countries is a large number. If you look at other regional organizations, how many do you have in other organizations? ASEAN is 10, the EU is now 27, without our British cousins, but we might soon become 29 with some Balkan countries. Mercosur is 6, whereas possibly the West African Union of what is it called? The Economic Community of West African States has a similar number of countries, but 26 is a large number. It's a very large number, and it's growing. And it's growing in the sense of really no longer being technically Asian anymore. So my suggestion, but it's informal suggestion, that one day the name of the organization could very well change. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as I said, makes it sound very Chinese because the charter is deposited in Shanghai and secretary is there. To call it the Asian Cooperation Organization, I think might be an option to be considered if suddenly East of Africa becomes Asian or Northeast of Africa becomes Asian. To what extent is the Arabic Peninsula Asian is a debate for geographers and historians. But we have as a conclusion to paragraph 4, I think de facto, not because I'm clear in my teaching, but because the facts are there, we have a activist dynamism. We have an extremely impressive capacity in only a few years to invent, create, innovate, overcome, bypass the facts of history, and to go to a situation today where we have an organization, which incidentally, I haven't done this because to me it's not so relevant, but which comprises so many square kilometers, so many inhabitants, so much of the GNP of the world, so much of the energy resources. We'll talk about the energy resources later, which makes it and which ranks it at the very top of the classic world power structure. In conclusion, I'm on time for once, it's 25 past. Make sure I don't go beyond 30 past. In conclusion, I think I'd like to suggest a few points for discussion after the tea break. Three such points of conclusion, if you give me permission, ladies and gentlemen. The first one is that there is a way in which we can see this comprehensive, ambitious world stage nature of the Shanghai Cooperation in its annual summit declarations. And the summit declarations, which tend to be much longer now than they used to be in the early 2000s, are extremely interesting documents to read, and I encourage you to read them if you can in Russian or Chinese or in English or any language, and read the lines and read in between the lines. They have a classic structure which is very interesting. They are, first of all, commenting upon the world context. The first section is always a commentary on the recent world crises, events, dynamics. For example, in 2008, there was a long part of section 1 on the international financial crisis. And so this is interpreted by me as suggesting that the SCO leaders, when they meet as leaders of one Asian organization, give themselves the justified role, in fact, to comment upon the whole world, the way the UN does, or the way maybe other organizations do. We exist as the Shanghai Organization, but we have a view of the world affairs. That's section 1, or sometimes section 2, actually, if I'm wrong. Anyway, another section, usually, is the systematic reminder of the ambitions and values and meanings and keywords of the organization. There is a section that always begins by explaining year after year after year what the Shanghai spirit is, what the vision of the Shanghai Cooperation is, how it is relevant to the post-Cold War world, and basically in a very sort of didactical way, taking the reader by the hand and saying, please read again year after year what we are, where we come from, what is our series of steps taken to become what we are today. And it is a useful section for students because then you have year after year the same words repeated. Education is repetition, and so one becomes very, very familiar with the facts, with the vocabulary, with the terminology, with the ways in which such concepts as tensions, post-Cold War, the West, the East, the values, the interests, sovereignty, all these terms are explained and commented. And the third section usually is courses of actions suggested in reaction to problems of the time. So depending on the year, depending on the events, you have a large part of that on Afghanistan, a large part of that on the even now environmental issues, and so on. So the third section is basically a sort of governance program or a policy program for the world. And I think this is a way to become clearly aware that the organization is thinking of itself and ambitioning, and in fact, in reality, a world actor in its own right. The second point of conclusion concerns the fact that some countries have been candidates to a certain status related to the organization and been denied that. I think it is very interesting, for example, that 2 countries applied to be considered as guests to the organization and perhaps other forms of affiliations, the USA and Japan. The USA in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, that very specific year of 2005, very important key year, and Japan in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. So the fact that they did apply for a guest status or other form of status in the organization, I think is interesting because it means that those 2 countries viewed and considered it important to be part of this new organization. At that time, it was still very, very new. And the year also matters. 2005 is when the Astana Declaration has its stance on non-regional influence in the region, plus the Afghan and military bases in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan story. And 2006 is the year when Japan was also denied affiliation to the CICA, Conference for Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia, and the year when South Korea was admitted as, I think, member or associate observer to CICA. I'll have to check. This says so much for the dynamism of these new organizations, which as soon as they are born attract attention and attract a desire to be a part of it. And the last question, the last point of conclusion, which will, I hope, come back in the questions today or in the following days, is the, well, not the nature, but the model of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Is it an organization comparable to others, and therefore comparative analysis does apply and should be applied? My answer is yes. Is it a sui generis or sui generis, I don't know how to pronounce in English, organization, which means in Latin of its own kind, and therefore not comparable, and therefore alien or different or out there somewhere and not really close to our concerns? Many people think so. and I don't agree. And I have I hope coming soon, an article which has a whole section on the fact that it is not sui generis. It is a perfectly comparable and not identical, but comparable dynamic taking place in your region, in Asia, in a certain context of the 20th century, as other organizations came about in other contexts, in other areas, always with the same reason: to echo, to answer, to react, to invent, following a major upheaval. That major upheaval being for us, not just the end of the Second World War, but the fact that we were totally destroyed within Europe. We were going to lose all our colonial resources, and that we were all having to finance newly created systems of social security, very expensive systems. And so so that's our context. In other regions, it's the post-Cold War, the post-colonial war, the post-independence context. So to normalize the Shanghai dynamic, I think is what I've been doing for some years and some hours, and so I make it explicit. It's 11:32.
Thank you. Thank you so much. But before we disperse for tea, maybe the topic of the assignment can be given to the
Yes,
students.
very good idea. So this is the result of very early mornings exchanges, because we have the best hours for the work is in the morning. So this is what it should be. You have received this by email or something? Or no, not yet.
It's here. It's here. Basically, they are introduced to the topic here.
Okay, but do you have to write it down now, or will they receive it by email or message or something anyway?
No, they will note it down and
Okay.
They will note it down.
So, based on your thorough reading of the SEO Charter, which I've been hammering to you is an interesting document, now I'm forcing you to read it, so I'm becoming very, very unpopular. Critically evaluate, so your critical approach is what we have in mind, the significance of India's acceptance and commitment, and the word commitment has my preference, acceptance has Professor Willis' preference, to the full membership of the SCO since 2017. If you say it's 2015, I readily accept. It's about 10 years ago, after about 10 years of associate status. So that's the topic which has been carefully thought about, which makes sense to us. We hope it makes sense to you. And 1,000 words, I think, is about, 2 pages, 2.5 pages. Do not be shy. If you want to put footnotes or references, you may. And I'm supposed to read 90 times 1,000 words before I leave, so don't go beyond 1,000 words. There are 2 unpopular things I should say now. The word limit is very strict, and the deadline is very strict. No essay will be accepted beyond Tuesday lunchtime, I mean, after the session. So bring it into class, bring it here tomorrow.
Bring it here in hard copy. Yeah.
In hard copy, which means on paper, and not recto verso, printing on only one side of the page. That's my only whim. My only.
Sorry?
Print.
He says with handwritten or typed?
Type.
Type would be better because the handwriting
You can't see the
so
writing.
beautiful.
Legibility can be an issue.
Yeah, I think in the 21st century, 2025, typing on the screen is. You still know what a typewriter was? No, you don't know what a typewriter was. Okay. No, yes, on the computer, yes, and printed on paper. One side of the page only, 1,000 words maximum, and before 1 p.m. on Tuesday.
Just for the clarification, nothing before 2017, right? Nothing about like 20.
No, you can. He said even 2015 is acceptable.
Achha, okay.
Yeah.
I just thought it's not acceptable.
No.
Of course, students always have these very, very pointed questions. The event that makes sense is that India is now in the process of the Shanghai Cooperation. Full member refers to a particular date, but 10 years before it's observer status. Something happened in the 2010s, which I call the U-turn, which might be an expression that could be changed. But yes, the starting point of the main reflection is then, okay? Why would India decide to apply, and what is India's perspective or the SCO's perspectives on India? But do not forbid yourself in the introduction to mention the previous years. And even if you think it's relevant, to mention the relations to other countries of the region before the end of the Cold War, or before, you had this story with China. If you wish to explain that the membership is particularly significant because China is in the organization, which made India hesitate for some time, do so. We are academics. We can just talk about this thing.
Do it your way. Disperse for tea and please return back.
This is amazing. This is amazing.
Thank you so much.
On the essay format and the essay content and the evaluation guide that we have, the marking system. Please ask the questions now. The topic that we should suggest to discuss now before your questions related to the substance matter of the day, not questions going in all directions, because yesterday you asked so many questions which made things interesting for me, because obviously I'm able to teach one topic and have broader interests, but we should stick to the topic. And I have many questions, of course, is the topic, are institutions, especially regional institutions, still relevant? A question phrased in a provocative manner, as you can clearly see. And so we ought to spend a little time on defining institutions once more, starting from the etymology of the word, and also look at the not opposite, but the contrasted reality to institutions, which is pragmatism, or sometimes what I called programs by contrast to organizations. This is really the substance matter of the tutorial, so to speak, or the title that is on the board or on the page. Yes. So institutions, what are they, where do they come from, and what do they actually mean? And I suggest that we privilege the anthropological or sociological approach to institutions rather than the political ones, the positive legal ones. What the lawyers call positive law in French, I don't know, but we are being told. But positive law is the set of texts that exist. Treaties, constitutions, acts of parliament, that's positive law, the textual law. So the lawyers, the public lawyers have their views on institutions, but from the point of view of anthropology, sociology, what are institutions? That is the question. And of course then, what are regional institutions in particular? The word institution, the etymology of it, I don't know about Sanskrit or Hindi or other languages, but in Latin it comes from the verb that means both to be and to remain, stare, which still exists today in Italian and Spanish languages, ester or estere, and in Spanish in particular there are two verbs for the verb to be. One means to be in the sense of to be lastingly or to remain, and to be institutionalized in that sense, and the other meaning to be, which is rendered in the English language by the difference between to be doing something or to do something. Anyway, so institutions by their etymology are designed to last. So they contain a time dimension. They contain the implicit or explicit desire or ambition or determination to create something that will last. And that's my approach to a number of dynamics today. I've hinted at this, but I will make it more systematic now, that if you, and you should, go to the founding treaty or charter or document or declaration that establishes an organization, It's a treaty in Europe, it's a charter for the SCO, it's a declaration for the ASEAN. The name changes, but you should go and look for the dispositions or the words or the provisions or the articles or sections that do or do not provide for the lasting nature of the creation of that organization. And my analysis is that often, as was the case in the European Treaty, there is no provision for leaving the community. So implicitly, it means that the founding persons, not fathers or mothers, but persons in a gender-free world, forgot to think what would happen if someone wanted to leave or if they wanted to expel a member. As I said again, it wasn't until 2007 in the Lisbon Treaty that the Europeans introduced Article, I think, 50, that provides for leaving the Union, and that was used only once by the British for the Brexit. In the case of the SCO, there is a provision, which is article, let me find it somewhere, that provides the reasons why. Yeah, Article 21 says that this charter shall be of indefinite duration, which is probably a routine expression in such a document, but still the word is there, so it's open in time. I'd be happy for someone to actually open the charter on the screen and help me find the... yes, it's Article 13, membership. Section 3, any member violating the provisions may be expelled. And Section 4 of Article 13, any member shall be entitled to withdraw following a certain procedure. So there it is provided for that a country can leave or be expelled, therefore come to an end of time in that sense. But the shade of is that the decision-making procedure within the SCO is not as clearly existing as a system by majority or unanimity or qualified majority and so on. It's a consensus. So no one will ever know, in fact, how decisions are taken behind the scenes. But the reality is that to date, no country has expressed a will to leave the Shanghai Organization. No country has been criticized in the sense of being on the verge of being expelled from the organization, which is a sign of the continuity. In the case of the European Union, we have one member having left. And for the situation of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO, we have a country that has left, Uzbekistan, in 2012 or 15, I forget. So the time dimension is the one that I wish to underline when we discuss institutions. And I think the etymology suggests it, and it is this time dimension which makes institutions as such relevant. If you think of it, institutions, even such as state institutions, constitutions, so on, if they are from the start, implicitly or explicitly not supposed to last, make no sense. They are then at best transitionary arrangements, and so on. And when we come now to the second part of the question, regional institutions, what is specifically relevant in the mention of the word regional? Yes. Yeah, can you back? I'm not used to being assisted so well, so to speak. And even the word assistance, I disputed, but it was used anyway. Here we have, with one word, regional, we have in fact 2 or 3 questions. We have one question which is, are neighbors really capable of stopping, pretending to try and failing to be allies and to become partners, lasting partners, open in time, open in sectors of cooperation, open in membership? That's the question. And the answer is presumably yes, because there are now in the whole world, if you look at it, several dozens of regional or sub-regional organizations that exist, that remain, that are more or less active, and that cover the whole range of informalistic to formalistic arrangements for existing together as partners. And the one sign that indicates where we are is one word in the name of the in the body, whether it's community, conference, market, union, and so on. So or conference. So you have an Asia-Pacific economic cooperation. You have conference on for the CICA, conference on conference building measures. So conference and cooperation are very loose terms. When we come to community, single market, union, we are going through step 1, step 3, or step 3, step 1, 2, 3, of a more integrative process, leading in some cases to full integration in the sovereign meaning of the term. So does the word regional make sense? Yes, because it has become credible over one century, accelerating, of course, in the 1990s. But the history of the communalization, or the history of the partnership among neighbors, begins in the 1930s with the Baltic Entente in 1934 and the Balkanic Entente of 1934. They are the first embryos, so to speak, of this movement that was followed by the 1948 Benelux creation, and then, of course, very quickly on the 50s in Europe, 67 in ASEAN, 75 in the West African case, and so on. And I mean, it's easy to find all the bodies that were created. With, of course, a clear acceleration in the 1990s in two forms: creation of new regional organizations, or activation of existing organizations. Two examples, of course, of reactivation, or two examples: the sudden acceleration of membership of ASEAN, going from 6 to 10 members between 1996 and 1997, as I've said to you before, and with a slightly, except for one country, it's an identical membership, more or less, between the 1975 Economic Community of West African States and the 1994 Economic Union of West African States. So going from a community to a union, in the case of West Africa, is what I'm trying at. So you have an effervescence, you have such vitalistic effervescence of the creation of regional organizations, accelerating in the 90s, that we cannot but accept the fact that the regional dimension makes sense as the new format in the post-Cold War of the ways in which countries and neighbors interact. Now, what is then non-regional? What is non-regional is either global or worldwide scale, or national. And I'm not saying that the national or worldwide levels make no sense today because the regions are so thrivingly active. All I'm saying is that the national dimension no longer suffices. And I'm saying that the world stage dimension is less active in creativity. Since the 1940s and 50s, we had creations of worldwide or world range organizations. The answer is basically no. The UN then had as offsprings the World Bank, the FMI, and or UNESCO, and so on. So the other UN agencies, yes, but since then we haven't had creations of worldwide agencies. Possibly with the exception of the World Trade Organization, but which has picked up from the preceding, what was it called? The GATT, yes. So, so we've had a conservation of worldwide institutions. We've had a thriving creation of national state institutions, a multiplication by 4 of the number of sovereign states between the post-Second World War and today's, going from half a hundred to almost 200. Yes, we've had that. We've had a number of nationalistic affirmations. We've had a number of post-colonial, post-independence, post-Cold War re-existence of states, as I've said before. But in most cases, no state has ambitioned or been able to conduct what to call it, a policy or an existence by itself. In other words, states that wish to remain out of the world or regional dynamics are very few. We could choose to name a few, but I'm sure we don't have to. But only on one hand, I think, can we count states or countries that wish to put the national quote-unquote isolated situation before any possibility of joining an association or a partnership with the neighbors. Some are officially neutral or independent, some are de facto reluctant to enter into any form of agreements with the neighbors, but only very few. Most states in the world today, if not almost all of them, have joined multilateral, regional associations of some kind with the neighbors. That's my second point. Institutions and regions. Now, if we take the two together, the question becomes, are regional organizations such as the ones I've mentioned called to last, or are still relevant, or are relevant? And of course they are in my approach. And what does it mean that they are relevant? So that's the most open question, the one I would like you to pick up in your questions to me today, please. When we look at different forms of regional affiliations of neighbors into partners, forget about allies, we notice a vast gamut of attitudes, of ways to conduct the partnership, from full integration to very loose good neighborhood. And it so happens that in the many way we have with the European construction and the new Asian Shanghai cooperation, two examples not at opposite ends, but different in nature, which can be epitomized by the terms supra-sovereignty in the European case, and I repeat the term juxta-sovereignty. Can you put the term on the board? Juxta-sovereignty, to explain how the member states of the SEO actually function. In my analysis, again, this is my analysis in my book, and I don't want to suggest it's the only valid one. We have, on the one hand, a dynamic in the European case, which consists of the idea or fact or necessity that nothing really lasting can take place, nothing really efficient can take place by way of common policies and civilizations without giving up some of the sovereignty to a separate sovereign body, which is the European Commission, the European Court of Justice, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we have in the Shanghai space, so to speak, a reality, a very interesting reality where, I repeat myself from yesterday, states both reinforced their sovereignty in a way which is, as we say in French, a very jealous sort of way, and at the same time share as much as they can of common analyses, provisions, courses of actions, and so on, but without finding it necessary and therefore not really discussing the idea of merging part of their sovereignties. So that's juxta-sovereignty. Is it somewhere? No?
Which document, sir?
No, it's not on the document. Can you just sort of type it on the screen so that the word is on the screen and becomes clear to everyone and not subject to my pronunciation or way of explaining things. Juxta-sovereignty meaning the juxtaposition, the parallel existence of very logically clear desires to be absolutely sovereign, which is the case of China, Russia, Kazakhstan, other countries, and I'm sure India, Pakistan, and all the other members, Iran, and so on, not being prepared in any way to limit their sovereignties or to discuss their sovereignties, in particular not in a territorial way, and at the same time putting together, now what does putting together mean? That's what we need to discuss. Putting together such issues as cooperation of central banks, military exercises, agreements, and on even legal definitions of such concerns as terrorism, extremism, and separatism, and so on. Putting all these subject matters in common reflections, common decisions to adopt certain courses of action, that is much more than a parallel neighbor-to-neighbor diplomacy. It's much less than joining a supra-sovereign capacity to force states to respect certain ways. It is not, in any case, just let's finish with one example. The monetary or the currency sort of issue. In Europe, it's been considered for a long, long time that the adoption of a single currency is a sort of confirmation or a proof or a solid, tangible result of our integration, which it is, because the currency issue is part of the sovereignty of the state. But we have two zones. We have the Eurozone and the other zone, the members not adopting the currency. So we have we call it in French, a two-speed Europe, which is not preventing the coherence of it, which is not disturbing anyone, pressing the non-euro using states to actually quickly adopt the euro and so on. So it's perfectly compatible. It's just, so we respect that there are limits to sovereignty. Similarly, in the Shanghai Asia, no one has suggested yet, really or credibly, to create a single currency zone. Yet, Russia in particular has on two occasions, suggested that there should be a single currency for exchanges, for international trade. Whether it is this currency or that currency is not the matter. So the ways to deal with the formalization of dimensions, whether to have supra-sovereign decision to have a single currency or to have a pragmatic de facto suggestion that it could be easier not to use the dollar or some other currencies to exchange among member states but other currencies, the concerns are the same. The answers, the solutions adopted are different, but the fact that all regions have sooner or later to address these issues, which are the same issues, makes regions, and I will conclude here, the unit of analysis. Now, to suggest that regions, in the sense I define them as inter-neighbor partnerships, are the new units of analysis is a very simple phrase, but one that is sometimes not accepted at all by people who claim that the only valid unit of analysis is the state, states, realists, inter-sovereign international relations in the classic way, or that the only unit of analysis that we should take into mind is the global world governance that will one day come about, which I doubt, but which philosophers have explained to us, starting with Kant, that it will one day be the world governance as the only guarantee of perpetual peace. So are institutions, original ones, still relevant? Of course the answer is yes, but how and why and to what extent, that's the answer, that's the question I put to you now. At 12:24. Having solved the issue, that's clear for all now, the reading and the homework and the due date and the length and all the rest of it. And I look forward to reading you, very much so. If this document is sent to students as well, yes, this is a remarkable document because it looks very simple. It's a table with names of countries and dates. But if you read it very carefully, you will notice patterns, you will notice accelerations, and you will perhaps do me the honor of taking into account the 4 reading guides that I've suggested. First is to notice what I call the systematic extension, which is almost the same as the acceleration. Second is the Sino-Russian balance in suggesting or welcoming new affiliates, which is definitely a relevant guideline for the 2010s, perhaps less so today. The third reading guide is the maritimization of the Shanghai cooperation. In other words, the new affiliates are located in the key seas of the world, and we noticed yesterday all of them except for the Atlantic. And the fourth reading guide is the Asianization dimension, or the de-Westernization, or para-Westernization, or beyond Westernization dynamic. And I resist the expression anti-Westernization because it doesn't make what makes more sense to me is to stress again and again that the self-affirmation of anyone, any region, community, state, region, is a logical and natural step, which was prevented from happening for about 3,000 years. For 3,000 years, there were impediments to free affirmation of self, due to colonialism, due to imperialism, due to imbalance, due to other things. So things are changing today. You were born in the most interesting times ever. Not I, but you. Students. Anyway, so I'll take your questions now with great pleasure. Focused on to this topic, please. Sir.
Yeah, Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening lecture. I could not, because of my prior engagement, I could not attend your full lecture. But in the last part,
We missed you. We missed you first.
yeah, your last part actually was once you were talking about this currency issue. Just last year, when the Russia was actually having a tension, I mean the business tension over this Russia-Ukraine war. That time government actually was going to Russia, and while paying for the visa fee, he has paid in the yen, I mean Chinese yen, and then only he got the visa. So secondly,
She was going to where? To Russia?
to Russia.
So she paid the Russian visa in yen?
Yes.
Yuan or yen?
Yuan.
Yuan, okay, yes.
So
Interesting.
by doing this, and then secondly, currency, common currency will certainly be a good idea, and I would say it's an ideal idea. But the thing is, by doing this, whatever the currency, I mean, whoever the currency which is going to be dominated in this SEO case is actually the Chinese currency. And after seeing all, I mean, these major infrastructure projects here and how, I mean, this major kind of negative coverage is coming from director policies and other things. So certainly, don't you think it is in future actually is going to be a more dominant and this actually it will be becoming a more and more Chinese-centric kind of. I mean, once currency actually dominates.
SEO being more Chinese-centric, that's what.
Yes, and
Because of the currency and other factors.
of course, yes.
Well, the short answer is yes, in the sense that usually contexts or circumstances make it possible for one to have more prominent position. Probably China at the present time for a number of reasons, some of them being positive ones, the economic performance of China over the last 30 years or so on, and the contemporary situation of Russia, which is to some extent kept away from world commercial dynamics. The other answer is that there is a difference between one currency of one country becoming the common currency or a properly common currency being adopted as a basket of formal currencies as the euro is. In the case of the euro, there is a creation of a new currency with a new name, with a new symbolism and so on, which has everyone who accepts to sign the decision agree on what the currency is. It's not the French franc or the Deutsche Mark that has become the single currency. It's the okay. These are the technical answers. Now, for the geopolitical answers and the power balance answers, there is also beyond the monetary aspect is a political one, which is the symbolism of the currencies. And so on the currency aspect, this is what we need the economists. We need to understand, and I don't, what difference it makes to international trade to use such or such a currency. I understand what it means not to have to exchange currencies all the time from morning to evening to exchange goods. But what it means to international trade, to the world GNP, to a regional cohesion, to have a single currency as opposed to having different currencies, I don't understand that. But the symbolism of it is what we have in mind. Can someone check on the internet when it was the first time Russia suggested to create a ruble zone or to use the ruble as the currency of exchange? It was some time back already. The first suggestion was more than 10 years ago, unless I'm totally wrong. I think it was 2004-05. And then it was re-suggested substitute last year, like 3 or 4 years ago. So whether it's the Chinese yuan or would not be the properly original step towards creating a monetary commonality in order to facilitate a trade among the member states. I presume the ruble is used within the Eurasian Economic Union exchanges. That would make sense. In Europe, we went through two phases. We had independent currencies, and then we created the so-called what was it called? European currency units, used not by individuals, but used only by firms and companies and banks to monitor. So we did it in 2 steps. Now, the symbolism, for example, beyond the symbolism of having the Chinese currency being used by all, which is not a satisfactory, it's not a satisfactory system. Not because it's a Chinese one, but no set of neighbors would find it not acceptable, but not even logical to use this or that currency as the one common to everyone, because the currency is something to do with the sovereign right to print banknotes. So the proper concept of single currency calls for the existence of a common central bank. Somehow. I'm not an economist, but that's what it means. So to have one currency, such as the Chinese one, can only be a temporary or transitionary decision. For what purpose? To avoid using other currencies, the dollar, the euro, or the Japanese yen, as the currency of exchanges. And it makes absolute sense, because every time a currency is used, I suppose there are taxes or costs, transaction costs that are levied. But precisely what is preventing the SCO member states from adopting a single currency is the fact that they are not engaged in a supra-sovereignization way. That so long as you have just that sovereignty, so long as you have, so to speak, and I'm trying to phrase this in positive terms, not in negative terms, so long as you have a system of happy parallel sovereignties cooperating, you cannot have a single currency. When I mentioned the word symbolism, I meant that I was struck when the euro was adopted by the value of the euro, 6.5 francs, for example, or something, which corresponded more or less to $1. So, and for many years we had a situation where was the euro less than $1 or more than $1? And when the euro was worth less than $1, we felt weak. And when the euro was worth more than $1, we felt strong. Totally artificial in economic terms. Strength and weakness is not defined as that. But still, there was clearly a European symbol of, leveling or equalizing with the USA, because we have this US tutelage in many, many ways over Europe, which we sometimes are happy with, sometimes we tend to resent. If there was a single currency for the SEO members, I don't think we are going in that direction very soon. I'm happy to bet lunch with you that it would be a, symbolic speaking, currency worth the same as the euro or the dollar, or 10 times more, something in relation in just purely arithmetic figures. So the question is excellent. The answer is less excellent because I'm not an economist. But
Yes, please. Yes, please.
This is a continual lecture. I'm Harsh from SIS. So my question is that this alternative institution also put the common currency like BRICS. Also talk about the common currency. And between the Russia and India also have the bilateral agreement for currency swap. Then there is no need to have a common currency on SCO. What's your story?
okay, let's not stick all the questions to the monetary aspects, because that would make me reveal the limit of my capacity. How can I answer you? I think in 2 ways. One way, which is very classic, is to say that however prominent immaterial aspects of economics are, however prominent monetary, financial aspects are, and the real economy still matters. And so what I think makes the BRICS particularly relevant to the world power structure is the fact that the BRICS countries are industrial producers. They produce real merchandises. They produce the real economic goods, for the transaction of which are needed immaterial financial instruments and immaterial currency tools. But if the BRICS, in the years and decades to come, become the more powerful bloc in international relations because they are going to be the more powerful bloc in economic production, this will be because they dominate or will dominate the real economy. So whether the BRICS exchange using the dollars or the euros or the yens is not irrelevant, but it's not the key question. Is that an answer? Have I understood your question or not? Not really.
No, I think you have answered it in terms of sir is trying to say if when the real economy becomes prominent, it is when then the currency aspect will come. But this is very transitionary of what is happening currently. Like how if SEO China, yuan is been using and all, it's very transitionary, but it cannot immediately, take away the US dollar hegemony. Because even if we compare it to what happens in EU having euro thing, and there also it's not happening the international trade mechanism, it's still the dollar which has been prominent. So there's a concept of de-dollarization which is evolving. So though the developing economy is been saying through BRICS and SCO that de-dollarization will take place, but over a span of time, it is only in the long run we can understand if this will take place. But US fights very well for this.
And the other question which an economist needs to answer is whether the present situation today, which is called the dollarization of the economy, as a consequence of the Bretton Woods system being dismantled and the, what do you call it, the connection between the currency issues and the gold reserves. I mean,
Gold reserves,
so
yeah.
that's
Like
gone.
how exactly the dollar gods is the whole debate on the Bretton Woods conference and all this, how the reserve aspect. So that way, the BRICS and all have not come up with a mechanism. So if that mechanism has not evolved, how can you use that exact currency as a thing to trade and everything in a larger perspective? So this is where the Russia and the India, when they wanted to do the swap through the ruble this one mechanism, that failed when the Ukraine war happened and India was trying to import more, and they wanted the trade happen to the Russia and rupee. It couldn't materialize because our trade is not balanced with Russia. So Russia was very clearly like, what will we do? That created there's a structural problem in whole this thing. So only when international financial order there is a very strong mechanism which sets, and that will depend on the real economy, because real economy is a production. So I is saying if BRICS can take over in terms of real economy, it is only then that influence will happen, or else that influence the mechanism in real may not function, but may be very rhetoric.
Good deal, I think. Is
It makes sense.
very good deal. So my non-economist political conclusion is that should certain countries, BRICS ones or others, somehow re-establish a system where currencies are based on reserves, gold reserves, this will presumably create more stability of the currency and therefore much more economic potency over the world. The limits of the post-Bretton Woods system is that currencies are no longer linked to real richness in gold, and therefore phenomena of hyperinflation, speculation, and so on are almost, like a free wheel, as you say in French. There is no control. The question that has not come to me yet, and which I'm going to ask myself, is regarding the BRICS. There is one characteristic of the BRICS which hasn't been underlined here yet. Is the fact that they are not a regional entity. The BRICS bring together countries located in all parts of the world. So it's non-regional. You have members in Asia or Eurasia, in Africa, in Latin America, in East Asia, and so on. And so this is interesting. Why? Because in some of my writings, I use the provocative phrase or idea that the meaning of what I call the regional evolution of the past few decades, the creation of a number of regional bodies and organizations, is that they are all economic based. They are all organizations, original groupings that are economic, markets, communities, unions.
Including European Union.
Yes,
That is
yes,
how it
yes.
started
So,
through the coal,
yes, it started with the putting in common of coal and steel in 1951. So hence the phrase, what is regional is not military, and what is military is not regional. Which is true for us very much so, because the military aspect is a NATO one, which is the Atlantic dimension. Some colleagues tell me that I'm wrong because the CSTO is regional. It groups countries that are neighbors, but without some major players in the region, notably China. And the BRICS definitely are economic, but non-regional. So they are, in my, not theory, but in my sort of modest analysis, an exception. And exceptions sometimes carry much weight. They're an exception in the capacity to bring countries together with a high degree of solidarity, economic solidarity, commercial solidarity, and political solidarity, located in vastly different regions with very vastly different problems. And what the BRICS will have to solve as a potential problem is the fact that in each of these regions, Asia, Latin America, and so on, one country will attempt to be the one leader in that region. But the BRICS are interesting to me for that reason. Much more than, as many people suggest, the BRICS should be called the Global South, and if you call it the Global South, it's a reaction to the North. There is North-South divide taking over the East-West former divide of the Cold War, and so on and so forth. Let me rephrase and conclude. The BRICS demonstrate the innovative capacity to create a system of solidarity among actors based purely on commercial issues to a large extent. So it's a victory of economics over politics in that sense. But I'm only beginning to include the BRICS in my research because so many people tell me I should.
Good morning, Professor.
Yes. Good afternoon. Oh.
The good news is that my question is not monetary, but the bad news is another about Pakistan. Sorry, being a lady, So, Professor, my question is that the relations between India and Pakistan have only worsened after joining SCO.
That was a question yesterday from someone sitting there, yes. 2 days before, yes.
My question is corollary to that. Okay, we can't really blame SCO for that the reason why we are bad is because of SCO. But what all I'm saying is that there is rats in SCO which ask us to share regional intelligence information, but the only thing we are sharing is artillery strikes. So what all I'm saying that given this particular issue that there are bilateral tensions between India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, China, do you think SU is capable, and if capable, then willing to solve out these bilateral problems? And adding to that, if not, like if we call them domestic issues, as we have mentioned at some point in our past lectures, and if we mention them as domestic issues and left them to be dealt at a bilateral or domestic level, wouldn't that reduce and narrow down the capabilities of SU, which we have been witnessing in other institutions? I would say the regional institutions in Asia right now are relevant, but I would say they are ineffective at points. Wouldn't that point of leaving these contradictional issues to be dealt at bilateral level would make SEO another institution that haven't been able to solve these contradictions at the same very point which these previous institutions have failed at?
The short answer is that the good news is that if there is a sort of frustration or expectation or wish that the SU could solve these issues, it means already implicitly a high level of trust or a hope or suggestion that the SU will or has that capacity or will have that capacity already exists. In other words, implicitly you are saying that you wish for the SU to be more effective in solving bilateral problems and to be monitored perhaps by its incapacity to do so quickly or fully or satisfactorily, whereas it is not its purpose. In terms of the multilateral, bilateral dialectics, such an organization as the SCO or the EU and so on can only hope to act indirectly, to persuade, to incite. The word exists in English, incite, yes? To suggest to members to table and discuss their bilateral issues. My second answer is that, as I said yesterday or the day before, and I will repeat, the existence of a multilateral regional organization does not relate to a mechanism designed to solve bilateral problems. And in fact, the existence of such an organization usually, in the short term anyway, increases increases bilateral tensions because it forces countries and ministers and governments and presidents to meet often regularly, whereas in the past they could ignore each other if they chose to. Now they have to meet every year as heads of state. They have to meet twice a year as prime ministers. They have to meet every month as ministers, sectoral ones, not all ministers, but some of the ministers. And they have to meet every week or every 2 weeks, I think, in terms of the internal ministerial services. And when people meet more and more often, systematically, they are forced to meet and discuss, and they have an agenda when they meet, obviously. They certainly can rediscover, or perhaps theatrically, stage and exaggerate the disagreements more and more. So the fact that within the present years, 20 years after the creation, so 10 years after joining, tensions increase is in fact logical. What is my intuition will happen is that the organization, the SCO in this case in particular, creates a forum for adopting multilateral positions, perceptions, courses of action, and gradually, this multilateral dimension will suggest forcefully, not forcefully, but will convincingly, that states, even two difficult neighbors, have, as the phrase goes, a superior common interest to agree on the issues. You are particularly sensitive to the situation between India and Pakistan for logical reasons. But if you zoom back in time also, go back in time and zoom back in space, you will find that territorial issues have been extremely violently causes of opposition in Latin America, but that was last century or the century before. In Europe, I mean, we fought 160 wars over borders in 200 years. And I'm not so learned about the history of Africa. In fact, what happened in Africa is that Europeans fought each other in Africa. And to some extent also in Southeast Asia. So it's not a specificity of India and Pakistan. And my last answer to you is to suggest that, but I mean this to be a grateful phrase due to your question. My intuition is that the moment you suggest that an organization, a forum, something should be able to do more and to solve problems, reveals a high degree of trust in the capacity of that organization to actually do this. Now, would you have been so frustrated at the SCO's apparent inefficiency to solve the Indian-Pakistani tension 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or going back in time? No, because at that time there was no organization. There was no possible, even imperfect suggestion that some meeting would suggest to calm the issues and so on. And yesterday I forgot to say that one of the reasons why there was a difference between Pakistan and Iran in the eagerness or the maturing attitude to the SCO is that Pakistan at first focused on the possibility, by joining the SCO, of tabling the bilateral issue within the SCO. And that was the reason, one of the reasons why India hesitated so long, because India didn't want that to happen. And then the SCO made it clear, the charter makes it clear, but you have to read between the lines. It makes it clear that the organization is not designed to be a forum for discussing bilateral issues. Is that an answer that is satisfactory? I suggest we have this discussion again in 5 years' time.
Professor, within an organization, different states has varying material capabilities, and I believe it is the material capability which underpin the influence of a state within an organization. But in the very first class, you mentioned that we are moving from a centripetal to centrifugal tendency, where peripheries engage the larger states. So what is the basis, what is the rationale of your argument? Because on the basis of material capability, it is China which is the greatest power within SCO. So how would periphery engage the larger states?
I forgot the actual source, but there is an article written by a colleague who says we should not use the word power or powerful without systematically going through the discussion of the factors of power and the factors of powerfulness. When you say China is powerful,
In terms of GDP and material.
in terms of GNP or in terms of this or that. So the economic or the economic factors at large becoming the more relevant ones in the present decades. So if that's the question, if I understand it, I will use the concept of the new forms of what used to be called what is it called? The race armament. What is the expression in English? The arms race. Yes. Okay. For so long, in fact, power hierarchies were based on the arms race. Who had what weapons of this or that kind, and so on and so forth. This has been replaced by, not entirely, but to a large extent, by a macroeconomic arms race or macroeconomic indicators race. So, logically, in your generation, the GNP of a country is a sufficient indicator almost to its world power. You could be, I could disagree and suggest that still we have other indicators that make sense, and more I think that we have the macroeconomic indicators, still the military indicators. In many ways now we have the demographic indicator. And within the demographic indicator, not only the total population, but the age composition of the population. Whether a country such as India, if I'm not mistaken, has a much younger population than China is obviously an indicator that, is this grossly wrong or is it roughly right? Is an indicator within the demographic indicator much more interesting and relevant than the total population, which is more or less comparable. The concept of an aging population, for example, is affecting today's Japan's and South Korea's economic power race, giving the Koreans some advantage. The bad news is that the Koreans have the lowest ever in the world fertility rate, 0.8, I think, now, which is below reproduction rate. Can you refer to your question? I lost track of what I was going to say.
You said that we are moving towards centrifugal tendency, where peripheries engage larger states.
Yes. So the centrifugal metaphor I used to suggest that clearly in simple geopolitical terms, what has been happening over the past 30, 40 years is the replacement of a center that in many ways was suppressed for centuries. Central Asia no longer mattered in Eurasian geopolitics, except that it was part of the Soviet entity, to a new situation where there were attempts, the new great game, there were attempts for peripheries to again somehow dominate or take over or partnerize in an unequal manner Central Asia, but it did not happen. The concept, even in security terms, is the concept by my colleague Tolipov in Tashkent of the security providers knocked at the door in the 90s and 2000s, suggesting to provide security to Central Asia from the peripheries. The SCO, the Sino-Russian SCO aspect is, or the CSTO aspect is sort of part of it. In other words, security, stability of Central Asia could only come from elsewhere. From the Europeans, from the Americans, from NATO, from whatever else. Because Central Asians did not have the capacity immediately to foster their own sub-regional coherence and cohesion. But that failed. In fact, the security of Central Asia, the stability and security of Central Asia, partly in military terms, but in more general terms, is not coming from the CSTO in a dominant manner. Is coming to some extent from the from the SCO, and so all I meant by my centrifugal analogy is to suggest that Central Asia today, with the immediate neighbors, is able to become credible in a world power game, engaging the peripheries. In fact, today the former hard security providers are turning into commercial partners, wanting to be partners of Central Asia, but in a way which Central Asia makes it more equal than maybe the dominant economic European Union would like to be. I'm getting a bit tired, and also these economic questions are not my best cup of tea. But clearly, to sum up, what I meant is that the idea that Central Asia would be still in the post-Cold War, in such a state that neighbors from the peripheries could claim to dominate it, on the contrary, has become a region which is leveling off, at least in diplomatic terms, with the whole of with the rest of the world. But it took time. What I sometimes say, which is a bit not simplistic but simple, is to say that it takes time for neighbors to reorganize themselves before they become credible on the international stage. 1991, 2017, that's how long? That's almost 30 years. That's how long it took for the Central Asian countries to stabilize, to become credible on the international diplomatic, energetic, economic stage, and today possibly to exist as a sub-region which will be equal in status or equal in power to other sub-regions.
I mean, you mentioned that this Central Asian stability and security in some way, I mean, SCO play important role. But don't you think that the last 2022, January 2022, when the fresh uprising happened in Kazakhstan, then the Russia sent its troops, and even Kazakhstan, Tokayev or maybe the leader, he asked Russia to send the troops in to crush the uprising. So don't you think that for the Central Asian countries, the security and stability is kind of much more, I mean, the Russia is much more important partner to play a bigger role in shaping the security and stability thing than the SCO, where SCO's military thing is much more dependent in playing kind of military exercises and all this thing, but somewhere Russia plays bigger role in actually shaping the security and stability thing. Don't you think?
Yeah, so we are going to cover the military aspect. That's for tomorrow in many, many ways, and I will distribute somehow on the screen or by email a number of tables which summarize all the so-called military exercises. But yes, you're right, the early January 2022 intervention by the CSTO in Kazakhstan is an exception. And in French we say it's the exception that confirms the rule. The rule being, sorry. Technician is still, yes. I think the battery is discharged. Yeah, no, it's not. I'm sorry. So yeah, the intervention by the CSTO in Kazakhstan in 2022, early January, is the exception. Is an exception. Now, does the exception confirm the rule? I would like to suggest, in terms of dialectical approach, yes. Which rule? The rule that the CSTO does not intervene domestically in member states. The SCO was almost called for in 2005 in Uzbekistan, Andijan 2005, 2010 in Kyrgyzstan, the Osh incidents and so on, but did not intervene. And when I put this in my lectures, I usually say that it is very meaningful for two reasons. On the one hand, and I will say this again next week, on the one hand, the governments of Uzbekistan at that time and Kyrgyzstan at that time were, how to put it, would have been relieved should the CSTO have intervened and stabilized the situation. But the second point is that it did not, and I see in the fact that the SCOs did not intervene, a demonstration of the capacity of the SCO culture to multilateralize the way in which the members operate. What does the charter say, or the CSTO charter say? It says it's designed to intervene in countries threatened or attacked by non-members. And Article 5, I think it is the same as Article 4 of the NATO Treaty. An attack against one is considered an attack against all, and so on. So that is the purpose of the CSTO, not to intervene domestically to stabilize the situations, but except it did in Kazakhstan in 2022, and so that's the exception. Analysts still cannot explain to us exactly what happened in January 2002. I think 2022. I think it was the 8th of January, or yeah, okay. We know the facts that there were instabilities, violences. There were men throwing explosives, and so on and so forth, and so. But exactly what it was, who intervened, so we just don't know. We know the intervention lasted very short, very briefly, only I think 2 or 3 days. We know that as a consequence there was a massive reshuffling of the Kazakhstan's governance. The president changed its role in many ways, prime minister. So that we know, but we don't know exactly what happened. Was it an external aggression? Was it an internal destabilization? And the reason why it was suggested to be more and more a sort of internal instability created by some private individuals labeled mercenaries and so on and so forth is exactly for that reason. If it were an international aggression of Kazakhstan, the CSTO would have been justified to intervene, but against an outside party. In 2001, why was a question of whether the terrorists came from within the territory of the USA or from outside is precisely this. If it came from outside, NATO should have objected.
One last
So.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Just a very, a quite short and crisp question. I was reading through an article which says that India's main concern to join SEO or to accept the permanent membership was to basically enhance its ties with Eurasia first, along with battling with all the anti-terrorist problems within the northwest borders. But sir, very recently there was this Riyasi terrorist attack, which actually went on and violated India's motto, which was towards a secure SEO. And coming to the whole bilateral relationships and the growing relationships, I would say, between Pakistan and China, it actually creates a lot of problems for India to go for, basically to due to this terrorist attack, there was a large lack of efficacy in the whole RAD structure for India. So it became a little irrelevant on the point of terrorism. And coming to the Russian part, that even though Russia is a very, I would say a powerful entity in the whole SEO, it actually has right now what I see is it actually is the power is diminishing day by day. So how is it still relevant for India to still be a permanent membership where the main problem, which is terrorist, along with it also hampers the relationship with the Eurasian countries?
Okay, 2 or 3 points to answer your question. The shortest point, the classic geopolitical suggestion, is that for India to join the SEO space, notably, is a way to enhance the proximity with Russia being just beyond the space of Central Asia. So that's a symbolic way. Of course, distances don't change, but it's a symbolic way to be part of an entity called the SCO Asia with India and then Central Asia and Russia. The other point of answer is that the creation of an organization does not solve all problems overnight. And so, back to your point, there is an impatience on your part that certainly overnight, within a few months or years, all problems should be solved because the SCO exists and India is now part of it. Tensions with neighbors, perhaps issues that I don't know on the macroeconomic stage, and so on. It's not the case. The existence of an organization means only one thing. It means the expression of a will to address certain issues together. It means implicitly more that members undertake not to fight each other, not to declare open war on each other, which we have stopped doing in Europe. Certainly, we stopped fighting each other in the military sense. Now we fight each other in terms of industrial or commercial terms. And so the difficult, my last point, and what makes your question difficult, is that for geopolitical analysis, it's always very artificial to dissociate issues to do with geopolitics, which are basically how space and power are related, from issues to do with human beings. And the moment we know that international politics and geopolitical dynamics are more often than not made up of violences, wars, or at least what is called in a very unacceptable term, border skirmishes, border military skirmishes, which means basically people die or villages destroyed and so on. So that human suffering aspect is of course always permanently relevant. We choose not to talk about it so much when we talk about geopolitics, diplomacy, or high politics and so on. It doesn't mean I'm forgetting it. It doesn't mean I or anyone is neglecting it. It means that it's not, that it is a sad human reality which has existed for a long, long time and which probably will to some extent still continue to exist. All I can say to this young man and to you is that at least the intuition that the existence of a diplomatic forum such as the SCO, which calls itself, or which is called by commentators, a security organization, sometimes the word now military comes into the definition, can only suggest that gradually certain issues that are the legacy of the past will be addressed and solved. You know what I'm alluding to. In your case, the very imperfect, let's call it like this, the very imperfect post-colonial management of your Northwest will be addressed and solved. The tensions in your Northeast at some point as well. But as I said yesterday, and you need, as academics, at least to take my advice in, whether you follow it or not, I don't know. But you need, if you talk about border conflicts, then look also at other border conflicts elsewhere. Because the ones that you mentioned are the ones you are very emotionally attached to, that's very logical. But the Uzbek Kyrgyz, the Chinese Tajiks, and the so on, these are tensions, and even, how can I put it diplomatically, the real concern of some SCO member states that other SCO member states might not be so respectful of their border areas elsewhere than in the regions that I've just mentioned. These are real concerns, fueled by the fact that the same SCO member states elsewhere in the world have, to some extent, on 2 or 3 occasions, reshuffled borders against the grain of international law.
So we are done for today. Thank you very much. See you again tomorrow. The lecture will start at
You are
sharp
wonderful.
10:30.
Oh, sorry. Let's.
Mail which has to be sent tomorrow.
All the
Yes.
best. See you again tomorrow.
Let me take this way because
Yes,
otherwise.
sir. Yeah.
Let me just.